Hey, this is Jennings, and this is How to Find Onboarding Friction with Developer Experience Testing. In this talk, you'll learn how you can use developer experience testing to find the problems that are stopping developers from getting started with your API, SDK, or developer tool. Again, my name is Jennings, and I'm the founder and CEO of Hacksaw Developer Experience Testing. Before that, I spent about 6 years as a developer experience engineer at PubNub. And before that, I co-founded a hackathon organization platform called Hacker League, which we later sold to Intel. So I've been in this space a really long time, just really out of pure passion and love for coding. So what is Hacksaw? Hacksaw tests and measures your developer experience with on-demand feedback from real developers. Really all that means is we're doing user testing with developers on your products. And a lot of people call it usertesting.com for developers. These are some companies we've worked with: SAP, Amazon, Snapchat, RingCentral, Cinch, and a bunch of startups. And the learning from working with these companies is what informs a lot of the recommendations that we'll make in this talk. If you have never seen a developer experience test, this is what one looks like. And really, it's just a video of a developer getting started with an API, SDK, or dev tool. So here we can see a developer using Tesseract.js. They're on a GitHub docs, they're getting started, they're about to copy and paste probably the CDN link, put it in their IDE. And if you are a product manager or someone responsible for developer experience, you are probably responsible for what this looks like, right? You're in charge of making it faster and easier for developers to get started so that you get more developers and developers are happier. Now, we find a lot of companies have never actually even seen developers use their product, especially new ones. So you might be looking at your analytics, you might be looking at your maybe bug reports or support team to get feedback from developers, but you've never really seen one use your product start to finish. So that's what developer testing is all about. It's watching a developer get started with your product start to finish so you can identify all the little issues and friction they encounter along the way, fix those issues, and make it better for developers the next developer who's going to get started. So to recap, why do we do developer experience testing? It is to find out what prevents developers from getting started with your product. If we break that down a little bit, the reasons for developer experience testing, the most common reason is to establish a baseline. Like I mentioned, most people have never even seen a developer get started with their product. So just seeing that for the first time can be really amazing. It can be kind of stressful and frustrating too, because you've probably been ignoring a lot of these issues or you've never even heard about them. So a lot of companies who choose to start developer experience testing are trying to gain an understanding. Once they've gained an understanding, they've found that friction, they can watch developers get started, they want to use that information to make changes. So you're going to find out what happens, make a bunch of changes, and ideally those changes will increase signups. Those signups will make trials, and trials will make money, and you'll be the hero of your company because you have found the reason developers weren't getting started with the API. So how do you conduct a developer experience test? It is not like software testing, so it's not automated. It's it's a human process, but it's not very hard. And I think you can get started in probably about 2 to 3 weeks from start to finish. To get started here, we're going to actually go through each of the steps one by one, and I'll help you define your first developer experience test. So hopefully by the end of the month, you'll have your own test all done. So let's get started here. The first step would be to define your audience. You're going to say who's testing. The next step would be to write your test script. So what are we testing? Finally, you're going to run that test, and then you're going to review it, summarize, and prioritize changes. Let's dive in. Okay, so starting off, we're going to define the target audience. Now you can see here there is a requirement column and a recommendations column. So a requirement column is kind of the variable, and the recommendation is going to be what we think a really good starting point for you would be based on our own experience at Hacksaw. So requirement. First off, most common question is number of developers, and 5 is a really great starting point recommended by user experience research for qualitative studies. The reason is that 5 people going through the same flow will expose about 80% of the problems in that flow. And any more developers, you're just going to get repeat problems. So it's going to provide you with a really good balance between coverage and value, right? So moving on, start with 5. It's easy. If you're ambitious, go to 10, go to 12. But If you go to 20, you're getting into maybe quantitative studies where you're going to have a lot more informed and calculated metrics, but you're going to see a lot of friction, and that's not what this talk is about. We're talking about friction points, problem areas, stuff like that. So 5, easy, good starting point. Now, language, go for the most popular language. The reason is what we're trying to emulate, at least in this talk, is the most common flow for getting started, right? So what is the largest market that we can emulate in this test? And typically that's going to be the largest programming language with the most common API, doing the most common thing with the API, because that is going to make the biggest impact into your developer experience, right? It's going to have the largest impact on your company and numbers because it's reflecting the largest portion of your target audience. So if that's the goal here, you should start with JavaScript or Java because those are the 2 most popular languages. Now, you might not support these. I mean, you probably do, but you might not. Maybe you're, a Python shop or something, go with Python. So it's up to you. But if you're, if you've got 70 SDKs, start with JavaScript or Java. As for experience, we're talking about the experience of the target audience here again. And we recommend 3 years experience. The reason being is you don't want developers to get stuck because of their own ability, right? We don't want developers to get stuck doing npm install because they've never done npm install before. We don't want someone who's doing Java for the first time because they're going to get stuck on all different things that don't even relate to your API. Now, 3 years is a good balance point because people have enough experience to to get over those little problems, things that aren't related to your API, but they're going to be inexperienced enough where if you don't hold their hand, they're going to trail off. It also represents the largest market, again, because there are far more inexperienced developers than there are experienced developers. Now, special requirements, this includes like IDE or platform or RAM, right? So if you're doing like a machine learning API or something and you need to have a whole, big video card or something to get started, you want to note that, just make note of it because you don't want to waste your time recruiting people who are on a MacBook Air and can't run it anyway. So moving on, another really big topic here is previous experience with our product. Again, you probably have a lot of data points with people who use your product, right? Your own developers can critique the product they made. You have your customer support team who knows the problem. So there are a lot of problems there that you've heard about, and it's more valuable to go after new developers because you typically don't have access to those as easily. Now, big one here is incentive. So developers aren't going to do this for free unless you've got a great brand. Or you've got a good t-shirt to give them out or something, good credit. So most likely you're going to have to provide some kind of incentive for developers to get started. $50 is a great starting point. This also ties into the amount of time they're going to spend. So that'll be the next slide. But $50 gift card is really the best point. Amazon money is basically as good as cash these days. You don't have to worry about kind of crazy transactions or rewards, stuff like that. You can reward anybody. I believe it's under $400 without filing taxes. Don't take that from me; it's not a legal advice. But typically, if you're just sending out gift cards, it'll be fine. You can also do things like Venmo. I'm not sure about what that looks like financially or whatever, but like Venmo, PayPal, I've seen people do that too. It's not it's way easy these days to reward people. You might get creative with like t-shirts and credits and stuff, but cash is king, so there you go. Once you've defined the audience, you've got your incentive, who they are, how much we're paying them, what are we testing, right? So these kind of go hand in hand, but typically you probably have an idea of what you're testing before before we even, at the beginning of this test, you go, oh yeah, we should really test. At the beginning of this presentation, you're probably like, oh my God, yeah, we should really test this thing. So this is really about defining the test details. Test length is 1 hour to start. Do 1 hour. It's a really great starting point. Most people think that developers can get started with their API in 15 minutes using the metrics that they collect or the analytics, but you'll be surprised, I'm sure. Most developers won't be able to get started within an hour. And I know that sounds crazy, but once you do this testing, you'll see that developers won't be able to use your product within an hour. I know, it's crazy. I'm going to skip starting URL because I'm going to go right to test script. So test script is essentially what are developers doing during this test? And again, I mentioned earlier, we're doing the most broad thing. So for example, if you're a telecommunication API, your getting started guide probably says, hey, this is how you send an SMS and this is how you receive one. So your getting started guide is a really good judge of what your test should be because it's probably your most common use case and where you're sending developers anyway. So you can really just set that starting URL, like I mentioned, to your getting started guide and say, hey, record yourself while you follow this, right? Follow the getting started guide, send an SMS, receive an SMS, and you'll know you're done when you reach the end of it, if you have a good getting started guide. Now, if you're testing just like a random, reference documentation, you might have to be a little more clear here and say, hey, here's our reference docs. We want you to, make an email list and add an email to the campaign and send the campaign out, right? You might have to kind of guide them a little more. But the funny thing is when you make that test script that's guiding them, hey, that's the route to your future getting started guide anyway. So by answering these questions, you're kind of defining your hello world if you haven't already. And if you have defined your hello world, great. You don't really need to even answer these questions. Again, these can be shaped. So after your first test, you might want to go and actually dive into some single guide deeper, right? Oh, we did it in JavaScript, but now we want to do Java. Let's copy and paste that test script. Let's copy and paste that test and do it again for Java. Another note is like on starting URL. So I just mentioned too, send them right to the getting started guide, right? Send them to the docs. Now the broader, so if you go from getting started guide, they're going to follow that guide and they probably won't do any Googling unless they have to. If you send them to the docs, you're actually going to be testing the UX of your documentation website. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what your goals are. So if your goals are to understand how good your developer experience portal is, right? You actually might send them to the homepage and say, hey, find the portal, find the docs, blah, blah, blah. We actually find that to be pretty common. If your goal is to say, hey, does our API work at all and kind of more test the subject matter and not the guide, you might actually, or the guide, but only the guide, send them to the guide. Now, here's the kicker. If you're feeling brave, send them to Google and say, hey, using our API, send and receive an SMS. Because what happens when you send them to Google is the world is their oyster now, and they might go to a Medium article to find out how to do it. Right? So that can be very interesting, but you're actually losing some of that high resolution look at your docs. Now, you might say, why would I ever do that? That's actually what developers do anyway. So by only sending them to the README, I mean, that's great, but that's also, given the chance that they find the README. We have found some crazy things by sending people to Google. Like, for example, a company was running ads on their own for their own keywords, and a developer got stuck in a loop Googling for answers, hitting an ad. The ad took them to the portal, which wasn't helpful, and they went back to Google. So this company was paying for ads that were actually not helping the developer, while the second, third, and fourth results would have helped them. So you can find wasted ad spend like that. Let's see. Another anecdote, another kind of finding which everyone loves is one of the first tests we ever did. We sent developers to, I think it was probably the portal, doesn't matter, but we found that developers, 5 out of 5 developers couldn't even get started at all in the documentation. Couldn't even get started at all in the developer portal because they had ad block enabled, and some kind of metric collection was not triggering because of ad block, and that wasn't redirecting them to the next page. So they never were able to even sign up. 5 out of 5 devs couldn't sign up. So think about how you're structuring that starting point, because it will expose different parts of your developer experience. And I would say most certainly do not provide them with accounts. If you can, make sure they sign up, because there is so much friction you have never seen in that sign up process and the API generation and all that stuff, which will be extremely valuable to you. Okay. So we're about halfway done here, and you've set up your test, right? You've defined your audience, you've defined what you're testing. Those kind of go hand in hand. Now it's time to administer the test. So where do we get those developers that we talked about in step 1, right? Where are we finding these people? Well, if you're lucky, you probably have a developer email list that has millions of developers, right? And that may or may not be good depending on how many you think have signed up. So you really, if you have a marketing list, that might be better than a list of trials, because right, if you're looking for new people, there's not going to be great. There's a balance there, right? How hard is it going to be to recruit versus do we want that new user feedback? But for the most part, you're going to use typical, advertising methods, and you can ask your marketing department about how to get started with that. So, send an email out, maybe post on LinkedIn, Twitter, job boards, things like that. I've seen DevRel departments take this over where DevRel posts on Twitter and they post on LinkedIn, hey, we're doing a study. You get a gift card. Come on, help us out. Now, when you post these advertisements, you want to include the requirements and you want to include the incentive. The reason is you do not want to include anybody who does not match these requirements. So it's a waste of your time to open that thing up to everybody and then screen them. Start, giving that information about what you're looking for as early as possible. Okay, so say you blast it out to everybody. You sent it out to 1 million developers. Give them a screening form. So make a form that says, how much experience do you have? Have you used our product before? Blah, blah, blah. Don't tell them what the answers are. Make sure people are 18 or older, stuff like that. Not legal advice again. But essentially, right, you want to screen the devs and make sure that they're matching your criteria in number 1. And you can do that through a form. If you're trying to go for 5, again, you're doing a real small one, you can just message them on LinkedIn, hey, have you used our product? Do you have enough RAM, right? Easy enough. You don't need to worry about all this scaling stuff. Now, we haven't talked about this much, but in UX testing, you have 2 options. You can do an unmoderated test or a moderated test. Now, there's pros and cons to each. A moderated test is when you do a video call with the developer, and an unmoderated test is when the developer records a screencast. The pros of a developer on Zoom is you get to interact with them, you get to ask them questions, you can guide them if they go too far off. The cons of that is that's going to take time out of your day to schedule those calls and get on those, get on the phone with those devs, right? And it's a really big process to do that. You're looking at if we're talking about 5 developers, that's at least 5 hours. It'll probably take you 7 or 8 responses to actually get the 5 good ones. So be considerate of that, but it is a much more high engagement, right? You're going to get a lot more quality when you can say, oh, why'd you choose that? Or what do you think of this page, right? There's a lot of guides on how to do a moderated study for user experience. I'm not going to cover them in this short talk. If you're doing an unmoderated study, ask the developer to use OBS and just record their screen while they get started and upload the video to you over email or some kind of form or something. I'm sure you'll figure out how to receive an email maybe through Dropbox, right? Something like that. And then finally, you're going to actually do the thing. So if you've chosen to do a moderated study, when you after that screener, follow up with a scheduler. So say, hey, we have all these slots for next week. That's when we're available to meet with you. They do their robo schedule. You meet with them, and you get on the phone and they start doing the test. You can walk them through that task, right? And you're just going to ask them questions along the way. Don't prod them too much. Again, look up how to run a moderated study. Otherwise, if you're not doing a moderated study, you can just say, hey, record your screen and get started and send us the video. And if it looks good, we'll send you $50, right? You don't have to really worry about that at all. The downside of an unmoderated study doing that screen recording is they can go do anything they want. They can go do crazy stuff you never asked them to do. You don't know what they're going to do. So you might have a lower, you might need to find more devs, right? Because you might have to throw some away because people just did crazy stuff. Now, I think I covered that all in administration there. Typical tools here, again, for a moderated study, go for Zoom. Zoom has cloud video recording, so enable that on your account. And if you're doing unmoderated, OBS is the best bet. The reason being is it records high resolution, and high resolution video is important for developers who have like 4K screens, right? I'm not going to get into that, but there's a lot of screen recorders that cut off after a certain amount of time. They don't record high resolution, all that stuff. So just go for the high res. Let's see, finally, reviewing the results. So let's bring up that graphic just for fun. And imagine the developer test went well. You've got a bunch of videos, right? We can see the developers getting started. What you want to do is then watch those videos or the notes that you took during those recordings and analyze all the friction points, right? You're going to start to see trends where, oh, wow, 5 out of 5 developers couldn't get started because of ad block or something like that, right? You'll notice those trends right away. You're going to make lists of those issues, the trending issues, Google Doc, whatever you do, Notepad, whatever you need. Just make a list of them and keep track of the developers that encountered them, right? When you're done, so what we have here on this slide is essential of what it looks like when you're done. You're going to rank those issues based on how often they're encountered and how early in the flow they're encountered. So basically, if 5 out of 5 developers encounter an issue signing up, that's going to be a super high priority item because it's guaranteed developers are going to hit that. If 1 out of 5 developers encounters a problem at the last step, it's like, yeah, I mean, that might be a problem, but it's a pretty low priority, right? Compared to the first one. So try to look at the number of devs and how early in that flow that is. Typically, you're going to find problems in authentication, getting API keys, getting started, signing up, and navigation. I mean, those are the most common ones. So this is an example of what a test results might look like. So for example, here we have developers on the free account were unable to send more than 5 messages, right? So developers are, let's imagine we did our testing, we got a bunch of recordings of developers trying to send an SMS message, and we can see that after 5 messages, they encountered problems, right? So going deeper into the notes or description of that issue, what were the problems? Well, developers run the script every time they want to debug, right? They run the script, they make a change, they run the script. After 5 executions, they hit a limit on the free account, and they get, say, a 403 error with no error message, right? So to you might have implemented that issue. You might have implemented that restriction, for security reasons, anti-spam, and you're like, oh yeah, 5 is enough for developers to get started. But when you actually look at it, developers go through those 5 messages in 10 minutes because they just keep running the script, or maybe they even use a live reload and they just run that script every time they save the file. So you'll see how the expectations that you set match up with how developers actually act. And you might not have seen this in analytics, right? Now 5 is low. It's probably higher for you, but you still might see these sorts of things. Another part of this issue here is that let's say you return a 403 forbidden, and this is actually from a real test that we did. So imagine you turn a 403 instead of an error message, right? Well, the developer's confused because they see a 403 and they don't see your trial account is limited to 5 messages. They see a 403. So they're really confused. When you're looking at the test results, when you're watching those videos, these things will become clear. I made them up here, and we're not looking at any real results, obviously, but you'll see the developer will go, hey, why did I get a 403 all of a sudden? That's crazy. Or they'll go, why, this has been running fine. Why did it stop working? And you might even know the answer, right? At that time. Don't tell them what the answer is. Just keep going, let them see how it goes. Using this information that you found, now you're going to propose solutions, right? So you might have already thought of some in your head as I described this, right? Easy. Increase the number of credits on the free plan. Go from 5 to 50. Next solution. Well, how about we also include an error message with that 403 so even when they hit the 50, they know why, right? And then finally, maybe you provide a notice in the documentation about the limit before they hit it. So that's a 3-prong attack on this issue, right? We're going to reduce the number of times people encounter this issue. We're going to inform them when they do, like at the moment they do. And we're also going to inform them before that they might hit it. So that will improve your DX because the next time someone comes through, they're not going to hit that 5 out of 5 limit. So the most important part of this whole thing, and really what's going to tie up this whole talk, is that we're making data-driven decisions here, right? And a lot of developer experience right now, you might feel this in your own company, are shouting matches about what people believe, how they feel, support, and how often they think they're getting issues versus what product thinks is important. The thing about DX testing is that it puts all the internal conflict aside. It's not about your company or what people think or who wants a raise anymore. This is about the developers and what they report the problem is. So the most important thing here is to cite the source. So wrapping it all up, the source says, hey, we hired this person named Morgan, looking down here at the source. They have 3 years experience, and we know that because we collected the information from that screening form. They spent 10 minutes trying to debug this error, 5 minutes searching Google for an answer, and then 10 minutes to create a second account to avoid the error. Imagine this happened, right? Then what you do is take that video file, either on Zoom, the OBS file, whatever they uploaded, and you're going to say, watch this at 23 minutes where this happens. So you're going to go through every video, identify the time period at the point that people encounter friction, identify the issue, and offer solutions. Now, you have a list at the end of the day of prioritized issues and proof that they're issues with statistics that say, hey, this was 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5, 5 out of 5, 5 out of 30, that are going to show you, that are going to inform your product. And you can't argue with that. It's giving you solid advice on how to guide your product and make developers' lives easier from the developers themselves, right? The other great thing about this too is it beats Conway's law, where this is no longer a department by department thing. You might have noticed I talked about portals, sign up, error messages, right? Those are all different teams probably in your company, but when a developer doesn't care, right? Developer sees the full experience, start to finish, and doesn't care about the individual teams, and it will expose how those teams work together and where they're failing to work together or where there's miscommunication, right? Which team is lagging? Which one is marketing causing problems for that sign up page, right? Is documentation failing to inform the user of a future error they're going to encounter? The developer does not care about your internal structure. So this is really what I believe to be the answer for improving your developer experience overall. And I really hope to see it adopted by every developer company out there. It's really insane to me that most of these companies have never seen developers use their own tools, right? I mean, this is a product, this is like a giant industry, and this developer's time is very expensive, right? If you're wasting their time, you're wasting money, basically, and they're going to go to competitors where their time isn't wasted. I'm not going to get into that. I want to show you the chart. You have competitors now, people. I don't know what else to say. There was a time when you didn't have competitors and it didn't matter. DX matters now because developers will just go somewhere else. In my conclusion, despite my criticism here, in my final conclusion, these are not problems, they're opportunities, right? So the most important thing here to remember is you're going to be tearing down your developer experience. You're going to be finding every problem that your DX has, every product and every mistake every organization has made in your company by doing this, right? And when you go present these results, it's very important that you don't take that in a negative light or put it in a negative light. Make sure you're saying, hey, we're giving a holistic overview of how we're going to improve this DX, and it's going to take effort from the whole team, right? We're going to work with everybody to improve our DX across the board. And that is really what I think to be also one of the biggest struggles for DX is you need to essentially align all those departments to get on board with making developer experience easier. And so this is how you do it. Again, thanks so much for taking the time to watch my talk. My name is Ian Jennings, and you can follow me at Ian Jennings on Twitter, and the E is a 3 because I'm Elite Haxor. If you want to follow the company, you can follow Haxor Developer Experience Testing at HaxorDX. I am signing off. Thank you, everybody, for attending the talk, and I look forward to talking to you in the DevX Con chat.